Hi, my name is Nathan. I'm from North Carolina. My brother and I, looking out the right side of the car, saw these 3 triangular aircraft of some sort that were floating perfectly still. They were probably 30 or 40 feet higher than the water tower, so they might have been 100 feet in the air. They were in like a perfect triangular pattern, the 3 of them. They had a light under each corner and a slightly bigger light under in the center. We thought, this is crazy. Neither one of us said anything when we first saw them. And then we passed them and we got out of sight of them. And I was like, did you see that? My brother was like, oh my gosh, yeah, did you see that?
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Debriefed. My name is Chris Ramsey, and today we are going to be looking at the final part of the read-through from the Lacerta Files. This is a meeting between this guy in Sweden who met with an alleged reptilian female by the name of Lacerta in the year 99 and 2000. We've gone through their anatomy, their biology, how they communicate telepathically, where they dwell, how they reproduce, where they're from, the origins, this intergalactic war that happened, and finally we ended with the science part. And this was probably the heaviest chapter that we've read so far, but it basically instructed us on what propulsion systems they use, how they navigate through this sort of bubble, para-universe, multi-layered, interdimensional realm. I don't even know how to put it into words, but a lot of you chimed in during that read through with some really, really interesting takes. Many of you have found amazing connections, and I look forward to seeing what you guys think of this last part. Before we begin, I would just ask you kindly to suspend your disbelief, because belief, as you know, often gets in the way of a good story. And also, if you don't mind, if you enjoy this content, you like the production quality here that I so meticulously craft and try to create for you guys to tell interesting stories, well then just leave a like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell if you're so inclined. Also, check out our shop at area52.shop if you want to support the show. We've got a ton of really cool merch. And by the way, I just want to say this merch that I have on area52.shop is all curated, designed, and quality controlled in-house. This isn't drop shipped by some strange company that I don't know what exactly they're selling you. I know a lot of YouTubers go down that road because it's kind of like they don't have to do anything. I pride myself in doing it all in-house with my friend Antoine. So him and I, we design everything that you see in the shop. We quality control it. We check out samples. We're back and forth, sometimes for months, for even just like a t-shirt or a shirt. So if you guys want some good quality clothing and accessories and also want to help out the channel and, support us here at Area 52, check that out at area52.shop. Folks, we paid the bills. Who's ready to get roasted by a lizard lady? She's been quite the sassy little reptilian, I will say. I wonder if they're all this condescending in real life. They probably have some type of superiority complex among them. I just wonder if within their own society, if they treat each other with such disdain. And also it makes you wonder, like there probably is some faction down there that is like pro-human and then there's like an anti-human. Yeah, I really hope that within this we find a little bit more out about their culture. I do enjoy the science. I think it's fine, but honestly, most of that stuff goes over my head. So we got one last science question to get through from Ola K, as he calls himself, and then we're going to move on. So here we go. Question. Only one last question. At our first meeting in December, you made it quite clear that you didn't want to discuss scientific and paranormal concerns. Why the openness now? Great question. Answer. The last time I saw really no necessity in overburdening you with facts of that kind, and now you were obviously overburdened. Therefore, I had preferred only to mention these topics in a peripheral sense. Apparently, however, some of my performances today have set you to thinking about your world, something that can't be all bad. And by the way, your human scientists will tend to regard my comments as humbug. and I see no great danger in spreading this information widely. No one will pay much attention to it. By the way, the words of the people who have characterized me as a creature of evil have their basis in belief in occult powers and magic, both of which things do not exist. There is no magic, only highly developed science, and everything that you label as magic is only a part of science. If you would only comprehend that, then you would be a step ahead in your development. My openness on the issue ends here. Pose other questions, please. Okay. I will say that, again, this is kind of convenient that she's like, well, it's all too complicated for your meager minds, and you guys are just going to disregard it as being woo-woo, and woo-woo doesn't exist, it's all science. I mean, that all sort of makes sense, and it all sort of cancels each other out nice and neatly, where if you question it, you are someone denying it and therefore inferior, and if you understand and grasp it, then you are supporting her. So from a creative writing standpoint, this kind of fills in a lot of plot holes. But who knows? You know, maybe if this was actually true, this is potentially what that would sound like also, right? So we got to keep an open mind here. Question. Good. Let's talk about UFOs. Can you explain to me how our governments came into possession of UFO material to the point that they could start their own projects? Did it have anything to do with the Roswell incident? Let's go. Now we're talking about some actual crash retrieval stuff. Answer, yes. But that accident was not the first one. I am no historian. I am studying only your current behavior, so my knowledge about those events in your history is presumably not very extensive. I will try to explain to you what I know about those things which happened at that time. Let me think about it for a second. In the years 1946 to 1953 in your timescale, there were 5 cases where extraterrestrial ships crashed to the surface of the Earth. In that crash, which you call the Roswell incident, there was not only one alien ship involved, but 2 that crashed after a collision in different parts of the land in the West. The one you call USA. You have to know that the ships of this particular species can remain levitating in the air for a particular period of time, even though they are damaged. That accounts for the spatial difference in their crash locations. These were indeed not the first crashes, but by that time, the second and the third. Another ship had crashed in 1946, but it was destroyed beyond usability. Interesting. 46, wouldn't have that been Trinity? When did the Trinity UFO crash happen?
The Trinity UFO crash reportedly happened in August 1945, near San Antonio, New Mexico.
I mean, that's more like 1945. Could Lacerta be mistaken? But it is interesting, you know. If a ufologist wrote this paper, then, they might know about the Trinity case. One thing first, before the explanation. It certainly sounds ridiculous to you that such highly developed extraterrestrial ships simply crash, and that a relatively large number did so in a relatively short amount of time. The explanation for that is likewise more than strange, but it is correct. It does not lie in the ship's drive itself, but rather in the direction of the field to your planet. This species that we are discussing, and it always in this time period that this species used a disc-shaped craft, used a propulsion system which ran according to the normal principle of fusion, to be sure, but one that at that time employed a more than conventional method for field alignment. This method had various advantages but also disadvantages. The repelling field must of course lie in the absolute correct angle to the surface of the Earth. This species used an alignment technology in their ships with which the field locked into place all the points of Earth's magnetic field. Okay. I love the idea that we're responding to UFO crashes because many skeptics out there will say, well, if they have the technology to bounce around the universe, how are they just simply crashing here on Earth? Valid questions. But the answers to that might be, multiple. Either we're taking them down, gravity, something or another, failure on the engine side. Who knows? But I like the idea that we're finally getting some sort of explanation, and it has to do with the Earth's magnetic field, which is really interesting because the 4chan whistleblower, if you guys remember, the one that worked on the crash retrievals, said that in Mexico particularly, the UFOs now today avoid it like the plague because there are some spots that are just like they'll take down ships. And not sure if that has to do with, again, the Earth's magnetic field or the fact that there are nuclear test ranges out there, but it's all very interesting. The second thing here, we mentioned some type of alignment technology with which the field locked into place all of the points of the Earth's magnetic field. And they said the repelling field must, of course, lie in the absolute correct angle to the surface of the Earth. It reminds me of, those magnets that are sort of superpositioned where you can just like throw up a video here, but the magnets, you can sort of place them anywhere. But once they're locked in, they kind of stay locked in. What's interesting is that they talk about angle. And obviously, Bob Lazar has spoken about this, and we've seen this in many photos and videos of UFO accounts, that prior to the crafts taking off at incredible speeds, they tend to angle themselves at a 45 degree and not necessarily in the direction where they're going, just to sort of align perhaps the gravitational amplifiers or whatever it is on the craft in order to take off.
It'd be easier with a model. On the bottom side of the disk are the 3 gravity generators. When they want to travel to a distant point, the disk turns on its side. The 3 gravity generators produce a gravitational beam. What they do is they converge the 3 gravity generators onto a point and use that as a focal point. Then they essentially bring them up to power and pull that point towards the disk. The disk itself will attach onto that point and snap back as they release space back to that point. Now, all this happens in the distortion of time, so time is not incrementing, so the speed is essentially infinite.
Very interesting. Just a few points of, connection that I thought were worthy of mentioning. Now, at that time, this species had just arrived on the Earth, and their point of origin lay on a planet with a more stable magnetic field, for which they had developed and aligned their drive. The magnetic field of the Earth is not really all that stable. It is subject to cyclical variations, and it forms field eddies under unfavorable conditions. Whenever a ship with one of those kinds, can we just hold on? What's a field eddy?
A field eddy typically refers to a swirling or circular movement within a field of fluid, such as air or water. It's similar to a small whirlpool or vortex. In the context of weather, it can describe a localized rotation within a larger system, often influencing local weather conditions.
All right. Whenever a ship with one of those kinds of drives gets into a field fluctuation or into an eddy that is too strong, then, for a short time, the repelling field can no longer align itself correctly, and the ship glides uncontrolled on its flight path. The drive is operating correctly, to be sure, but the field fluctuates in all directions, and because of that, the ship can crash. In the case from 1947, which you addressed, it is my understanding that one of the ships got caught in a fluctuation. Its field linked up unintentionally with that of its squadron leader, and it collided with another ship whereby both of them were heavily damaged. The cause for the magnetic fluctuation at the time was probably an electrical disturbance brought about by a weather event. Both ships crashed as a result. One of them fell near the collision point, the other 100 kilometers or so distant. All occupants were killed in the impact. The thin hull structure of that kind of disc craft is in and of itself not very stable, since those discs have not been designed for crashes as well as for flight in a field where there are exterior forces at work. Two things here. One, not all the beings allegedly were killed. So this is according to Colonel Philip Corso, who wrote a book the day after Roswell. Very, very interesting book indeed, but it details that when the craft was discovered, there was a breach in the hull. Bodies were seen kind of strewn around the craft, almost crawling or trying to leave the craft, and ended up dying. But one of them survived, climbed this little hill, and was trying to get out, and the soldiers panicked and sort of lit it up. if you know what I mean. But yeah, the second thing is that the crafts were actually quite intact, where normally a aircraft, a more prosaic aircraft, would have been blown to smithereens. These crafts were not. Your human military collected the individual pieces at first until they discovered the whole ships with the dead creatures aboard. Immediately, they classified everything as top secret and brought them into their military bases in order to analyze the drive. The secret endeavor was to set the alien technology in place later against evil enemies of that great country. That is as primitive as it is ridiculous. I believe I remember, I don't want to specify exactly your date, that it was probably between 1949 and 1952 that there was a rather bad accident during some research being done on one of those wrecks. According to what I heard, what members of my species were told by members of that government, it resulted in an unintentional activation of one of the drive's components in the unshielded condition. As a result, for a very short period of time, how should I phrase this? There was an unchecked shift of the environment to a plasma-like condition, which, on the other hand, through a very, very unfortunate accident, caused an overturning of the general power field into a magnetic pulse of immense power. Do you have any idea of what kind of an effect a plasma magnetic jolt has when it comes into contact with an organism? No. How should you know that? Of course you don't. Disturbance in the structure of the field and bioelectric feedback. Imagine, if you will, a human body which is engulfed in bright flames for 3 or 4 of your days. Those flames apparently do not go out, and they burn the body right down to its last constituents. Well, then you have an approximate impression of what happened. I think that 20 or 30 of your scientists were killed in that lab. My goodness. I am not currently familiar if I've heard of any of such tales that go back as early as the 50s, the 40s and 50s. It's very interesting. If any of you have information on that, I would love to check it out. We continue with some more crashes that Lacerta talks about. 2 further crashes occurred in 1950 and 1953 in the water catchment area of the American continent. Those ships were able to be recovered from the crashes relatively intact. The one in 1953, as I remember, even had an intact drive core. It was by means of that device that you saw for the first time that you had understood the entire concept fully incorrectly, and that you had reconstructed it fully incorrectly. Even today, you still don't have it right. So that's something that's really interesting, because even back then, in 19 or 2000 or whatever, they're saying, oh, we don't have it right. That seems to be the common consensus, is that there is this Cold War brewing between all of the leading powers of the world to successfully back engineer, control, and understand this type of propulsion system or this type of gravitic manipulation. Until any of us successfully engineer it, none of us will be able to truly harness its abilities. But the second we do might be a very scary moment in the history of our human existence. That species which had built the ships in the first place, a species which I, by the way, count among those who are unfriendly towards you, was naturally worried about the investigation of their own technology by your kind. They did not want, however, at that early point in time, to begin direct conflict with you, and so they chose the diplomatic path and came into contact with that government during your 1960s. Of course, they did not divulge the real reasons for their being here: copper, hydrogen, air, but rather they pretended to be curious, quote-unquote, researchers and offered to show people the functioning principles of the ship, whereby they would expect in return some, quote-unquote, favors. Simple-minded as you are, you of course agreed to it and were deceived. Whoa, okay, now we're talking about some interesting stuff. We're getting into some of John Lear's allegations and even the Greada Treaty, which was apparently made between Eisenhower and these aliens. It also, might bring up the Holloman Air Force landing where the creatures exited the vehicle and they were taken away and met with some government officials. This is very, very, very interesting. And I love the intergalactic diplomacy happening here. I like the idea that these creatures bleed, that they aren't perfect. This gives me some type of hope for humanity, that we, although inferior, might stand a chance. We have their technology in our possession. They don't like that, so they came and said, yeah, we'll show you how it works. And then John Lear, in his document mentioned that they kind of gave us their technology, but we realized we couldn't pilot it without them. And then they said, can we, abduct some people and perform experiments, which is what they're doing. And as mentioned by Danny Sheehan, we've found these headbands, perhaps from the crash in Roswell, which when reverse engineered could amplify our psionic capabilities. And maybe that helps us control these crafts a little better. This is all sort of coming together now.
And we came to a conclusion even in those days that the reason most flying saucers have failed is because our conclusion was that this being is part of the guidance system. It was part of the guidance system. That's why we failed in propulsion and guidance system of these flying saucers.
And we didn't figure it out.
We never figured it out. We didn't do enough on that body.
I'm sorry if I'm pausing here, but I'm suddenly realizing that all the work that this channel has done and all the work that we've done collectively to look into a lot of these alleged whistleblowings or alleged documents or MJ12 or stories and all of these and the guests that we've interviewed are finally coalescing in a way that is making sense of the greater picture. Now, mind you, I don't know if that is correct. This could be a giant psyop. This could be fake. This could be a hoax. This could be whatever. But rest assured that I will not dismiss it. I think that this is very interesting to actually contemplate. And it is a scenario that, although unlikely, there's a non-zero chance that this is the reality that we live in. We continue. You gave them raw materials. You gave them secured locations for their bases. You gave them access to your most secret defense data. You gave them access to your DNA and much more. And all just to quench your greed for power and information. The alien species, of course, quickly noted that they were dealing with simple-minded creatures, and they gave you false and inferior information about their technology so that they receive much more out of the collaboration than your kind do. For example, they gave you information that the drive can only be constructed with unstable elements of a higher-ranking number. But they withheld the information that the field drive can be constructed with various modifications to work as well with stable elements of a lower periodic number. And generally, that's the way it's done. Through these half-truths, they made you dependent on synthesizing of high-numbered elements, and thereby renewed by their own technology. Their clues to the construction of your UFOs were laid out in such a way that the solution to old problems caused new problems to arise simultaneously. They never told you the complete truth, but always built in again and again clever lies, which later lead to technical problems and to your dependence on them. Whoa, this is sounding a lot like Bob Lazar here. However, if I was a government PSYOP, a human-run government PSYOP program, perhaps I would like to throw the information out there that Element 115 is required to fly these crafts when indeed it is. So is this a double bluff, a single bluff? Very interesting. But if true, this means that the work that Bob Lazar was doing was essentially throwing him and the rest of the American government for a loop in a rat race, that led essentially nowhere into more problems. I also find it interesting that she says that it is possible using those heavy elements. So it doesn't actually negate the work that Bob ever did, but she also says that it can be done with other things, which would explain why there have been sightings of these craft sort of collecting water samples and hanging around, uranium mines, especially. Like in Rua, Zimbabwe, there was a massive uranium mine there when that happened. So it would make sense. Okay. I'll be frank. I did not expect to be this excited about this document. Like, I mean, I was excited. It was fun to get through, but now this is all of a sudden becoming plausible? I don't know. Let me know what you guys think. And by the way, if you're CIA and you're watching, leave a like, subscribe. In the last years of your 1970s and your early 1980s, it finally came down to various events between the alien species and the human government. I don't want to go into detail here since there is much that even I am not exactly sure of. The whole thing lay in the context with some new, or better said, the old technical problems with your own self-constructed ships, whose camouflage and drive partially failed to function in test flights in the open. Because of that, the function of secrecy was threatened. Your military and your politicians slowly, very slowly, came to the conclusion, after more than 20 years of this, that they had been deceived by that alien species. Multitudinous incongruities and the overstepping of bounds of the treaties by both sides finally led to an altercation between you and the extraterrestrials, which culminated in the liftoff of 3 of the alien aerial objects through a special, how do you say it, EMP, electromagnetic pulse, weapon, and a military skirmish at one of their underground installations. Hold on, now we're talking about Dulce. Now we're talking about this alleged underground altercation that happened at a secretive military base once we found out what was going on. So, is Lacerta, is the person who wrote this, just a big fan of ufology, following in the footsteps of Phil Schneider and Bill Cooper and Bill Moore and all these other guys? Or are all these people telling the truth? You know, the former is more likely if you're going to Occam's razor it, but the latter is not to be completely thrown out the window. As a consequence of these attacks, the alien species ultimately withdrew from all contact with you and was understandably more angered about your kind. Therefore, I count these extraterrestrials among the 3 groups who are hostile towards you. And while the other 2 are more occupied with their own business, among them waging a cold war for dominance on your planet, your old, quote-unquote, friends and partners are preparing to supply themselves finally with the sole and absolute dominance over raw materials and human DNA. At the moment, it is probably true that they lack some of the technical possibilities and the large amount of forces which they need in order to achieve their goals directly. In spite of that, we are counting on negative actions, possibly ever of a more subtle kind, against you in the next few years or decades. Whoa, okay, so they're gearing up, they're coming to attack, they're getting ready, you know, but maybe, I don't know, this is all sounding a little wacky and zany. I will also say that the more I read this, the more I kind of part ways on 2 distinct and opposite paths here. Either one path where, holy crap, what if this is real, right? What if? That's an amazing thought experiment and fun to think about. But the other side is, if I was a government trying to, you know, false flag attack its own citizens in the future by way of a potential quote-unquote alien threat using reverse engineered technology and you know, sort of the whole Project Bluebeam type thing, I may insert documents like this and quote-unquote whistleblowings on sites like 4chan, Reddit, or other conspiratorial websites in order to further the psychological landscape that I've been laying. Begin to implant this idea within the population that there might be some type of alien threat. Now, couple that with what's currently happening with OSAP, ATIP, ARROW, and the government, and how, we have threats from another planet. We have to, you know what I mean? I urge my listeners to be on guard. Do not take any of this as the truth. Don't dismiss it. And be aware that there could potentially be some type of human manipulation behind all of this as well. Equally as interesting, and doesn't make it untrue. These could be half-truths. I love this stuff. All right. Here we go. Question. Will the other extraterrestrial species undertake nothing against these warlike actions? Specifically, something ought to be on Earth for the more highly developed species. Answer. You're wrong there. Specifically, for the more highly developed species, there is simply, at the very least, your fate. You are animals for them, animals in a very large lab. Understandably, an alien intervention on your planet would disturb their projects, but I don't think that they accept a confrontation with other species for it. Many of them could look for another research planet for themselves, or they could study over a long distance your behavior and your consciousness/awareness, since crisis situations could have an attraction for their studies. Whenever you people take a look at an anthill, and another person comes along and steps on that anthill, what do? You go on your way, or you research for another anthill, or you observe the ants in their crisis condition. But would one of you, even though he were larger and more powerful than the one who stepped on the anthill in the first place, defend the meaningless ants? No. You have to imagine for yourself the viewpoint of the more highly advanced creatures. You are the ants. Don't expect any help from them. Whoa, hold on a second. Disagree. Hard disagree. Lacerta, you cold-blooded lizard lady, you have no idea how empathetic human beings can be. Thank you very much. If I saw somebody destroying any natural habitat of any other living creature, I would like to think that I would indeed, if not step in, at least speak up. Do you disagree? Let me know. Of course, we would ask for help when it became clear that your old partners were ganging up on you. Some members of that human government are fully aware of our existence, also partially owing to an old religious basis. For example, there is a gigantic partially underground building in the capital which is totally dedicated to my species, and that also has a direct approach to an elevator shaft and to an underground system in this building. Partial meetings have taken place and do take place between us and humans. We have passed on information to you in the last few years. According to what I know, we will keep ourselves as far away from the conflict as we can. You ought to learn to solve your own problems yourselves, or to become intelligent enough never to create those kind of situations. What will come and who will possibly place themselves on your side, only time will tell. I really do not want to make any indications about that. Okay. Lacerta playing the neutral card here, not getting involved, saying that we should learn our own lessons. And you can't really blame her. You know, there's probably a reason they've survived so long. It was probably staying out of conflict and underground. Lacerta, if you're watching this, I would love to have a sit down with you as well. I would love to talk to you about all of this stuff. Please reach out to me. And let's get a conversation going. And perhaps you'd be surprised at how much we may have evolved since you last spoke with this gentleman. I have here 5 prints of different UFOs which claim to show UFOs. Can you take a look at the pictures and tell me which of them actual extraterrestrial aerial craft can be seen? Interesting. I really wish we had these pictures, but that is cool. Answer. I can try it. You posed many questions to me today which even I cannot answer unequivocally. Don't overestimate my knowledge. I'm no expert in alien technology and the construction of extraterrestrial ships, to be sure. There are mostly some technical details and peculiarities about genuine UFOs with whose help one can easily differentiate them from natural phenomena or human forgeries. You falsify sometimes the pattern of genuine ships, therefore it is not so easy simply with absolute certainty to identify an object. I'll try it. Show me the photos. Here's a comment by Ole. She considered the pictures respectively for only a couple of seconds and then sorted out photos 1, 3, and 5. That's an interesting detail to put in there. These 3 pictures here are obvious counterfeits or erroneous identifications. In one picture, it certainly seems to me that a real existing ship of an alien species was adapted for a small model here. It lacks important characteristics which are tied in with the technically and physically associated field. Generally speaking, a picture is all the more fake the clearer the outline and the colors are, because a levitating ship is generally hidden in a shifted field condition that even distorts the colors or forms according to alignment. It might perhaps sound strange, but hazy and spectrally shifted photos are sometimes to be interpreted as an indication for a possibly authenticity. Whoa. That's cool. Again, just sort of echoing what many UFO observers have said in the past, is that if there is a gravitational distortion around this craft, it will undoubtedly skew any type of attempt of photography. By the way, this object is floating above the water. If it were a genuine ship, we would have to see in any case either a trough or a swell on the surface. Since the surface is flat, it is obviously not a genuine ship. In my opinion, none of these three pictures show genuine objects in flight or UFOs. Here in this picture, I see above all no artificial object in flight. It seems much more to deal with only a light reflex in your simple optical cameras. You really ought to be intelligent enough not to fall for a mix-up like that. When your general public chases counterfeits and frauds for a long time, then they will presumably discover too late what is really going on in front of them in their atmosphere. Okay. So, we have a photo here. I'm going to pull it up. This is interesting. No way. That is crazy. Because this is a famous UFO, alleged UFO landing in March of 1974. The caption for this reads, this was taken by a French medical doctor that remained anonymous on March 23rd, 1974, in Taverne, in the department in Var. During a major UFO flap over France, skeptics doubted the picture on the ground that the luminous rays cannot end like this. Of course, they do not normally, but the skeptics simply forgot to consider that these are not luminous rays, but light emissions by ionized air. I mean, that is a beautiful, beautiful image. As someone who is into film photography, or at least getting into film photography, you know, one of my biggest life goals is to capture a flying saucer on film. Not for proof, not for evidence, just for the beauty, the sheer beauty of these crafts and like the impossibility. And also something about, you know, this prosaic technology, this film mixed with the pinnacle of technology and sort of coming together. I think it's just really beautiful. So that's the photo we're talking about here. This one seems genuine. At least it displays the necessary characteristics. I would assign it at first glance to an alien species who have been visiting your planet for the last 35 years or so. The object itself is metallic and disc-shaped. Certainly it is distorted in form and color by means of a field effect. These four white long, quote-unquote, processes on the underside of the ship itself portray a kind of quasi-gravitational light manipulation, i.e., the universal force field is being shifted in the direction of a simulated gravity. Actually, it is not a genuine light. It is mostly not a genuine light whenever you see illuminating UFOs, but a special, strongly charged form field which manifests itself in the space that matter inhabits as a quasi-light. The reason for the activation of this special high-energy system in an atmosphere is not completely clear to me. It's possible that it is a kind of investigating or influencing of the environment. In any case, it is terribly careless of that species to allow this technology to be photographed by humans. Well, I guess that most of you just plain don't understand it, and those who do will not say anything about it to the general public. Whoa! Kind of corroborates the sighting, kind of corroborates, what the initial thoughts of that were. Very cool. Here is photo number 4, Petit Rechin in Belgium. Oh, this is interesting. This is really interesting that this one was brought up. There's a bit of a backstory with this particular photo. The person who originally took this during the Belgian UFO flap, okay, there was a Belgian, known as the Belgian wave, in the 90s. There was this insane wave of triangular crafts being spotted throughout Belgium by actual military, police, Air Force. A picture was taken by a photographer named Patrick Maréchal. This photo quickly became an iconic image of the Belgian UFO wave and was widely circulated in books and documentaries and news media. It was often praised as like definitive proof. So 21 years later, apparently the person who took it confessed in 2011 that it was indeed a hoax. But the story goes a little deeper for those who are willing to follow me on this. Subsequent interviews, Patrick seemed to walk back or soften his confessions. He stated that he was under a lot of pressure, and he also claimed that the media distorted his comments. Many experts agree that the light in this photo would be very hard to hoax, nearly impossible. If you're out there, I would love to have the opportunity to interview you about this photo. Now let's talk about what Lacerta thinks about this photo. This is in fact a genuine aerial object. It is no way extraterrestrial. Triangular aerial objects in flight are simply not used by alien species, or not in this form at least. That streamlined kind of form is a human concept. It is one of your own secret military projects that you build with the help of immature alien technology that was handed over to you by the extraterrestrials during the 60s and 70s. Generally, the form of the hull for a genuine extraterrestrial ship is of no consequence. For inside the field itself, there are no exterior forces that have any effect there. In general, the ships have a rounded off form and they are built without hard edges, a disc or a cylinder, so that the field can flow more easily. Your projects decree that along with the alien drive field, there also be a conventional jet engine system. Therefore, they are always triangular and built thus with streamlining in order to be steerable with this primitive recoil principle. So interesting. This is getting really, really interesting. Wow. Even the 4chan whistleblower mentioned that triangular crafts do not exist. Now, that's a bold statement. For many of you who listen to that, you said, what is he talking about? Of course, TR-3B, there's these other triangular shaped crafts that we've witnessed in the past. But I think what he meant was that these ships aren't extraterrestrial. They're not something that they've observed. And then if we look at the Immaculate Constellation document, which was added to Congress as an official statement, they had also mentioned that these triangular crafts were ARV, or alien reproduction vehicles. So cool. In the example here, the ship glides above all on its genuine field drive. Do you see the distortion in the quasi-light in the rotating cylinders? That is an unmistakable indication for the authenticity of the photo. But why, you might ask? Are there 4 cylinders? That's unusual. Even the interval seems to be incorrect. The coloring is very dark, and the interior optical distortion is very noticeable. Presumably, a reconstruction of the original system by your scientists. Since the alien species has just not given you any more information since the disagreement, they are rebuilding the system single-handedly without actually being able to understand what kind of dangerous thing they are doing. Both of the forward cylinders are too close to each other. They will definitely flow into each other. The color shows me a powerful residual radiation. It was probably the case that high elements were used, again, as customary for the shifting. It is in any case very dangerous to be unshielded in the vicinity of the field. Did the person who took the photo display any kind of radiation and burn damage? To me, this has got to be the most interesting portion of this 4-part series by far. I am enamored right now. I am completely enthralled. Question: I don't know. Where do these military UFOs come from? From the United States? Answer: yes. I think generally that's true. From the Western continent. Question: why do they fly over thickly populated areas of Europe? This photo comes from Belgium. That doesn't make sense. Can you explain? Answer: why is it that only I am able to explain strange human deeds? It's possible that these are long-distance tests or tests with electromagnetic camouflage systems. The old enemy of the American nation is on this side of the world, so why wouldn't they test the here? At home, they've had enough time to have had their ships crossing back and forth. Maybe they have aroused too much observation there. With one of those kinds of unstable field structures, as your photo indicates, I consider it somewhat improbable that ship is capable of making a flight of that length over the ocean. It's possible there is a test station here on your continent. Unfortunately, I don't know anything about it. Interesting. Saying that there might be some secret military base in the European continent. I don't doubt it. Probably. Question: Many readers of the first transcript have posed the question how your original contact with EF came about. I already know the story from your narratives, but could you repeat it here once again for this volume and for the new transcript? So this mentions the meeting between EF. EF is the person who set up this meeting between Ola K and Lacerta. Of course. Now, the story began about 2 of your years ago, here in Sweden. I have been strongly interested in your species and your behavior since my youth. I had already studied your literature at that time as well as possible. Naturally, it is not easy in my homeland to come into possession of human books, but since my group or family stands in a higher ranking order, I was able to gather some material together and sometimes to speak with others of my kind who have already been in contact with you. I was really very curious about your species, and as soon as I was allowed to come to the surface, I attempted to assemble more information immediately. Above all, it was expressly forbidden for me to commence direct contact with humans, because in my position at that time, there existed no necessity for doing so. Very cool that she's just kind of curious about humans in the way that, a young person might be curious about extraterrestrials. It was in your year 1998 when I was on my way further north from here in the remote forests in the vicinity of the entrance to my world and was looking for biological specimens, which we use in order to watch over environmental pollution and destruction of your flora and fauna statistically by your own kind. At that time, I was already on the return path to the entrance. We can even orient ourselves more easily, by the way, through our senses to the Earth's magnetic field, and already in the vicinity of the large lake, when much to my surprise, I came across a cabin in the woods. In this cabin, I sensed a human consciousness/awareness. It was EF, actually. I had no permission for contact with another species, but by the same token, I had set in place my mimicry capability quite successfully prior to this, even with larger groups of you. I had never ever come across a human being when I was alone. Now, let's call it primitive curiosity. I wanted to talk with a person in this cabin, and so I knocked on the door. E opened the door, and we got into an interesting conversation. His language was not quite yet common at that time for me, but it's not all that hard to learn a new language when one can read the information in the consciousness/awareness of the opposite individual. I simply told him that I came from a foreign country in the East. Of course, at the time, he did not really, quote-unquote, recognize who I was. He was totally convinced that he was talking with a creature of his own kind, although it was simply only a mimicry image. I love this. This is a cool story. Since my assignment, anyway, had its own goal, an investigation of this terrain, which was to last for several days, I visited him in this span of time 3 times as a human person. At first, we talked mainly about really ordinary things. Later, we got into religious and physical topics. He seemed to be impressed by my knowledge, and I was likewise impressed with his clear thoughts and his, for a human being, well-displayed personality structure and his own opinions. You really like giving yourselves over completely to a public opinion or conditioning, as for example, reptilian species are evil and stuff like that. I steered the conversation in the direction. Am I the only one wondering if they hooked up? This sounds like a third date type of scenario. I don't know. Just throwing that out there. There's probably a category on the hub. All right, moving on. Head out of the gutter, folks. I steered the conversation in this direction, and EF said something to the effect that he believed in alien species and that they did not have to necessarily be evil, but perhaps only different than his kind are. That pleased me. At that juncture of time, of course, I could not speak concretely with him about my knowledge because he wouldn't have believed me. He would have taken me for a human practical joker. I cultivated the very, very unusual idea for my kind to show him my true exterior, something that I did during our conversation at the 4th meeting in the cabin. Actually, he was predestined for contact. He was open-minded, honest, intelligent, not religiously inclined or conditioned. He lived alone and isolated. And no one would believe him should he decide to go public with his story. I dared to take the step, but then I had serious doubts about the propriety of my act, especially when he reacted very violently. He got control of himself again after a time, and we could finally talk concretely about definite matters. Now he had no choice but to believe me. This was the beginning of a series of meetings which initially took place there in the woods, but later took place in his remote residence. Finally, he brought you into contact with me. And for that reason, we are now sitting here once again and talking about things which probably won't be believed out there in human society. Whoa, okay. Always a little bit fishy was this idea of meeting with some type of journalist here to spread information, although they did not want to be brought into the light. They wanted to remain secretive. Then yet, why are you holding this conversation? This makes a lot more sense. She kind of stumbled into this situation and her curiosity got the best of her. I feel like she's hoping no one will believe what she's saying. And that's why she keeps repeating, no one's going to believe it. No one's going to believe it. I think she underestimates a lot of us out there. Super interesting. This is wild. Anybody else want to see like a major motion picture done? This would be so cool. Question. You said you would not have had permission at that time for contacts with human beings. Do you now then have permission to talk with EF and me about all these things and even to make this scientifically public? Answer. Yes. That is difficult to explain and for you to understand. Let's just say, I find myself in the position now to arrange this permission without having to take into account any consequences. In this position, I am quasi-immune against certain restrictions. Let's look at it that way. Yes. Question. If other people want to come into contact with your kind, do they have a chance to do so? Answer. Generally not. We avoid contact with you and we operate on the surface only in remote areas, and there we use mimicry techniques in case we should meet some people. That I am talking with you now does not mean that others will follow my example. It goes without saying that you could try to find an entrance to my world and penetrate your way into there. However, that can sooner lead to unpleasant consequences for the infiltrator. You have next to no chances on the surface of recognizing us. You can't even contact us directly. We have to contact you, just as I did with EF. Those kinds of contacts, however, are not the rule, but are very rare occurrences. A non-zero chance that I'll have a reptilian on this podcast eventually. Or who knows, maybe I already have. Untrue. No, I haven't, because they can't be on camera. Question, can you describe your subterranean homeland location? Answer, I can attempt to do so, but I certainly will not tell you where this place is located. My homeland lies in one of our smaller underground settlements to the east of here. I'll give you some numbers so that you can make a better impression for yourself. Just a minute. I have to try to convert the measurements approximately into your units. It is a dome-shaped cavern at a distance of about 4,300 meters from Earth's surface. The cavern was organized as a colony about 3,000 years ago. A major portion of the ceiling structure is artificially integrated into the rock, and the form was remodeled into an almost elegantly proportioned and very flat dome with an oval ground plan. The diameter of the dome, according to your measures, is about 2.5 kilometers. The height of the dome, at the highest point, is about 220 meters. Underneath that highest point, in every colony, there stands a special whitish-gray cylindrical building, a kind of supporting column, which holds the honeycomb net-carrying structure of the dome. This building is the tallest, largest, and oldest in the entire dome, for it is always situated as the first construction together with the security of the ceiling. In the meantime, of course, there were times when it was completed and reconditioned. That building has a very special name and religious significance. We have only one of those columns. Larger colonies have more columns, according to the construction of the ceiling. One of the main colonies in Inner Asia has an example 9 of those kinds of supports, but that colony also has over 25 of your kilometers in size. The central building is generally a center of religion, but also a center for climate control and a center for the behavior and the regulation of the lighting system. We have at our location, altogether, 5 large artificial light sources, which generate your UV light and its warmth through gravitational sources. The air shafts and the light systems from the surface likewise run through these columns, and naturally, they are very intensely controlled. That's very interesting. What about their sewage? Like, where does that go? Wouldn't it just, like, stink under there? Wouldn't that, like, where does that air end up going? Strange question. I know, I get it. But also, I'm just trying to, like, poke holes in this. By the way, we have 3 air shafts and 2 elevator systems there, and even a tunnel connection to the next main colony, which lies approximately 500 kilometers to the southeast. One elevator shaft leads to the cavern near the surface. The other leads to one of 4 depots for the ships. You remember, the cylindrical ships. That is naturally concealed closer to the surface behind a rocky mountain face. Normally, there are only 3 ships there. It's a small depot. The other buildings of the colony are, for the most part, concentrically ordered in oval circles around the main supporting column, and they are without exception much flatter, generally only between 3 and 20 meters tall. The shape of the buildings is round and dome-like. The color is even differentiated according to the circle and distance from the main column. Okay. Interesting little descriptions of all of this. To the north of the column, there is an additional, very large but very flat, round building. This building interrupts the concentric system of the colony with its diameter of about 250 meters. It is the artificial sun zone, in which specially illuminated corridors and rooms are housed. In these locations, very powerful UV light predominates, and they are used in order to warm our blood. There is even a medical dispensary and a meeting room located there. Beyond the outer ring of the colony, there are zones in which animals are kept. You know, we must consume flesh as nourishment. And the gardens in which plant nourishment and mushrooms cultures are cultivated. There is also hot and cold running water there from subterranean sources. The power station is located on the edge of the colony. The station is driven by fusion as its base, and it supplies the colony and the suns with energy. My group, or family, lives, by the way, in the 4th ring of the buildings out from the central support column. So much in such a short time. To describe to you all the buildings and their tasks would be going too far. It is difficult to describe something like that to you, for it is a completely different set of surroundings and culture from what you are accustomed to in your life on the surface. You really have to see it for yourself to be able to believe it. I would give a lot to get a tour in one of those. Man, that would be cool. Might be the last thing you end up seeing, though. Question, will I myself see it sometime? Answer, who knows? Maybe. Time brings new opportunities. Whoa. Oh, I just got goosebumps. Maybe that's why we've never heard from this guy ever again. Question, how many creatures of your kind live in this colony? Answer, approximately 900. Question, that is the end of the interview. Do you have any final messages for the readers of this transcript? Yes. I am thoroughly surprised at the many comments to my words.
Of course, I am naturally also disappointed about the religious portrayals of me as the enemy which have been voiced and which have been buried themselves deeply in your mind. You should learn to set yourselves apart from the old conditioning and not to stand quasi under the control of something or someone who has already been gone for 5,000 years. You are, after all, free spirits.
Those are my final words. End of Lacerta File 2. I'm a little sad about the end of that. I something in me, I had a negative gut reaction to this being in the beginning of these interviews, mainly because of her disdain and her condescending nature. Then towards the middle, I began understanding why she felt this way towards us. And in the end, I kind of like her. It wasn't until she mentioned her own sort of curiosity that I was more taken by this being. Because that shows me something that I can relate to, this genuine curiosity. The same curiosity that we are currently experiencing, reading about her kind, is perhaps the curiosity that she displayed when seeing this little cabin and sensing a presence within it. I love the idea that she just gave us a small taste of her world. And she's absolutely right, just by even going through the colonies and columns and the different areas, it's a lot for us to take in. I'm currently watching the show Severance. I don't know if you guys follow that on Apple TV. It's really good. Probably one of the best sort of sci-fi stories, in a long time, but it's so mysterious. Like, the whole world itself is just too much to grasp at once. We get these little, and that's kind of what this feels like. Like, if you were to stumble into a new world with a new species that had a completely different culture, religion, and society, it wouldn't be so easily relatable to your own. You would have to consume it in small bits, because it's like starting a movie, halfway in. You're like, what's going on? Who are these characters? Where are we? I'm very curious to know your thoughts. I can't wait to read the comments on this video. I was hoping we were going to learn a little bit more about their culture and their society, and I didn't actually think I'd get to know Lacerta a little bit more on a personal basis, and that was a fun surprise. So, if you did enjoy this content, folks, let me know in the comments, because I would love nothing more than to bring you more of these conversations between humans and aliens that exist out there. I've done my research and I've compiled quite a few of them, and I think it would be fascinating to run through them, of course, with all of you. Folks, thank you so much for joining me on this journey. Highly appreciate it. Make sure to check out area52.shop if you want to support this channel, or Patreon for extra content. We upload weekly vlogs, and we'll see you on the next video. Peace and love.